Hello, good evening to our viewers in Indonesia, and a good morning, afternoon to those joining us from other parts of the world. Welcome to PRANKS, Project Management Knowledge Sharing, brought to you by the Project Management Institute Indonesia chapter. My name is Iksan Lukira. You can call me as Luki. I'm a program board member of the chapter PMI Indonesia, and today I will be your host. On the behalf of the PMI Indonesia and the chapter volunteers, I would like to extend our very welcome to our speakers and all the attendees tonight. If this is the first time for you to join the PRANKS, so this is the regular event that we run twice a month, and we invite subject matter experts, practitioners to share their knowledge, ideas, and experience. So if you like to speak at our event, or if you have any suggestion for the speakers that you would like us to host, do reach out to us. And let's begin our sessions. So ladies and gentlemen, in some cases, as we know, using framework in a project management, it is easy to use one framework to manage a project or organization and teams, whether using agile or adaptive approach or waterfalls. However, in certain scenarios, when the scale of the project is quite large and also complex, the needs of the project to be adaptive to change, to respond to change, and still have a tight planning scope as part of the organization strategic goals, it is important to consider another solution. So combining project management approach can be a solution to get the best method of execution approach. Although both adaptive and traditional seems opposite, nonetheless, by leveraging the benefits and navigating around the weakness, allows the project manager to identify a suitable methodology for its project phase. And today, we're so lucky to talk about hybrid project management. Joining us, speakers from San Diego, United States, is Greta Blash, Senior Consulting Facilitated Method. So a quick introduction about Greta. She is a senior consultant from a facilitated method, also author, speakers, and trainer on program and project management, organizational change management, agile mindsets and methods, and also business analysis competencies. Greta is also a frequent speaker at various events in IIBA, also PMI. And as a notable project and program and analyst expert, she designed a lot of courses, curriculum. And there is 2 courses actually in LinkedIn that she has designed. Okay, so working in several organizations give her a wide range of exposure in project management, including in IT industry. So she is an experienced servant leader and project management professional training, mentoring and developing project leaders with focus on facing engagements, collaboration, and leadership of stakeholders and team members. Okay, but before we start, I just want to remind our attendees, and I would like to greet our speakers. So, hello, Greta, how are you?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever.
Yeah, it is a night in Indonesia. It's evening, so good evening from Indonesia, and also good morning in San Diego. Okay, Greta. So before we start, I would like to read about some ground rules to preserve the quality of the sessions. So for the attendees, all the participants will be on mute and the videos will be turned off. If you have any questions, just submit it in the chat box and the session will be recorded. And the e-certificates will be distributed to all the participants. And the auto submission videos, it is exclusive for only for the chapter members only. And the recording of the session will be uploaded to our YouTube channels. So happy learning and give us a feedback. But before we start, I just want to one announcement first. I think Greta also has announcement information about learning programs that she wants to share to this chapter. So please, Greta, please welcome to our session.
Thank you. Let's see if I can share my screen. There we go. Okay, so this actually is a condensed version of a hybrid project management course that I do for PMI training, which used to be Seminar World. So this is a one-day course that PMI has me provide. I think right now it's scheduled to be done like 7 times next year virtually. I don't know about the in-person. I do this one. I also do one on business analysis for project managers, which is very similar to the LinkedIn learning class that he mentioned. Just a couple of certifications. Actually, I'm kind of proud. I just got the risk management certification a couple of weeks ago. I just tend to take and use all of these to kind of expand the way I look at project management, because it's not just what's in the PMBOK guide or just what's on the PMP, but there's a lot that you can learn about other areas like scope from the business analysis point of view, the risk. I have been doing some of the discipline agile. I don't teach it as much. If you're not familiar with discipline agile, which is the method that PMI brought in as far as agile, very different, not prescriptive, not telling you how to do things, but giving you a lot of options. Really good program there. So let's kind of go back in time and see where this came from, because this is really not so much about tools and techniques and all, but more about a mindset that Agile brought to the table to doing project management. And actually, I go all the way back to 1998 when the Standish group said, you know, we could really do better on our projects if we could deliver something more often, rather than going along and speaking to the stakeholders and getting their understanding of what they need, and then going away into kind of a black hole for a number of months, maybe years, before we deliver anything. And by then, it probably doesn't match to what they need at that time. So this was really looking at, can we not kind of move things into smaller delivery pieces so we provide some benefits a little earlier? Kind of based on this manifesto that was done, and just kind of an interesting side note, one of the individuals who was part of creating this manifesto, I had actually worked with before. Both my husband and I had worked with him in another company, and knowing him and how strong and opinionated he was about his particular way, which was more object-oriented type of work, I don't know how those people came up with any agreement, but they did. And it's just basic things. It isn't saying, for instance, you don't have documentation, you have barely sufficient. You have to figure out what the documentation is for, who's going to use it, how long is it going to last. It's a mindset change, not necessarily a whole bunch of tools and techniques. Now, Discipline Agile went back, because this was in 2001, Discipline Agile has updated it a little bit to talk about things rather than just working software. And still the software kind of bothers people. And sometimes we talk about it as a solution instead, but talking about consumable. Consumable means that whatever you create works. It's what the customer wants, and they're going to use it. It isn't just we create something and hope somebody comes, but we actually make it and make sure that it's going to be used, because that's when you get the benefits from it. Rather than talking about, as we said before, customers collaboration, we talk about stakeholders. That moves it beyond. It's everybody, all the different stakeholders we work with, that we have to collaborate with them. Responding not just to change, but rather responding back to more frequent feedback. And the fact that what we're trying to do is continually get that feedback, which in many cases is change, but getting and making sure that we're still on track with what we're doing. And then the last one that Discipline Agile added in here had to do with the transparency, making sure that everybody knows what's happening, whether it's an issue that we put on an issue log that everybody sees, or whether it's the progress we're making or maybe not, so that we can get that collaboration with other people. So that was the initial. Then what followed from that were a lot of principles. And to me, this is what works in any project. It doesn't matter whether it's an agile project, a predictive waterfall, or a hybrid. And that talks about, first, early and continuous delivery, getting things out so people see some benefit from the work we're doing. Welcoming those changes so that we are able to get that competitive advantage. We all know whatever we're doing, our competitors may leapfrog us at different points in time, and we need to be able to adapt and maybe change some of the things we had planned on doing farther down a little bit more frequently. Delivering something frequently, making sure that we work together throughout the project, not just at the beginning when we gather information and at the end when we review it, but that we collaborate and have a joint collaboration and working throughout the project. And in fact, one of the things that is usually suggested, if we're not meeting the needs and we're not getting approval for what we're doing, what we really need to do is do more frequent feedback sessions, more frequent reviews, not a matter of saying, oh, I need to go back and use another tool or technique. I need to cooperate and collaborate with these individuals more often. The team itself, this is a big difference. And one of the things that you'll see in the 7th edition of the PMBOK guide, for instance, a lot more emphasis on leadership. And in fact, I actually worked in some of the collaborative sessions when we were developing the 7th edition. And we had a lot of discussions. Do we call the project manager still a manager, or do we call him a leader? Because we're really looking at a change in the way that we work with the team. The team is not being managed. The team is being motivated and led by supporting and empowering them to make those decisions, not having everything come from the project manager. Face-to-face conversation, obviously, when we're in a virtual environment like this, having those conversations with the cameras on for a meeting so that we can still get the benefits of the body language, the facial expression, things like that, which come and add so much more to our discussion than just having a written or verbal where you hear things. Podcasts are still great, but they're a one-way conversation. And when we really want to solve a problem or understand a need, we really need that two-way conversation, including a lot of those extra things like the voice and the body language. When we start looking at this, the progress is actually delivering something that works. Now, maybe it's a delivering of a wireframe to show kind of an idea, but it's something tangible that people can look at. It's not that vaporware that, oh yeah, this is what it's going to do. Just imagine a screen that has these colors and these boxes on it. No, we show something and have that review. Making sure though that what we identify and what we actually are working on, it's sustainable. It's a continuous cadence. That's like doing your to-do list and having 15 things on there. You know you can't get them all done today. What you have to start to learn is how much can I do, and each day do the same amount, and that therefore not get that burnout of trying to really work that 18 hours to get something finished. By doing that, we end up having a little bit more of the technical excellence where we don't get a lot of sloppiness that we have to turn around and go back and fix. All of the agile things came from lean. And one of lean's main things has to do with waste, eliminating that waste. And waste is when you have to redo anything. And so trying to do things right the first time, waiting until you really know what you're doing, those are some of those aspects that help make sure that we have the highest quality when we do that, which comes back to this idea of maximizing what you don't do. I want to maximize not having to redo things, maximize having to rework something. So I want to kind of look at what should I be doing, making sure I do what I should and not do what doesn't make any sense. The team itself, as I said, empowering, supporting them, giving the team members the ability to identify how to do certain things, not the project manager, because sometimes we're not the ones that have that expertise. People on the team are better versed at making some of those how decisions. Stakeholders working with them, they decide what we need to do, but the team itself should be involved, especially when we start doing the how. Now, part of that comes from having this ability to kind of reflect back after we try something. Did it work? And if so, let's continue to do it. If it didn't work, are there a few things we can improve? And this whole idea of reflecting back has really permeated. And in the 6th edition, when they added that new process called Manage Project Knowledge, it talked about regular and often doing lessons learned, which is the equivalent in Agile of a retrospective. Part of what you're going to see when we get into this hybrid is, unfortunately, we have a lot of terms we may have that mean the same thing. And as a result, in some cases right now, we have to do a translation. But basically, this all comes from those 4 values on the manifesto, those 12 principles. And then there are just tons and tons of practices and different ways that you can do this. Sometimes we refer to those as branded frameworks, things like Kanban, Scrum, DSDM. Those are actual kind of frameworks where they've decided by somebody or some group how we can put these practices and principles into play. Now, what PMI did, they started looking at the fact that there are different approaches that you can use on a project. And they broke it down into 3 main categories: predictive, adaptive, and hybrid. Predictive is the plan driven. This is your traditional. This is where you've done a project before, you kind of know what needs to be done. You can do the plan up front. Many times you don't really deliver anything until it's finished. Maybe a construction effort, something like that you have to get all the pieces put together before you can deliver it. But you've done it before, you can plan it up front. We don't like to use the term waterfall because a lot of people don't like that. But there are some sequential areas that just have to be done in that order. The adaptive refers to anything where we're a little bit more agile, a little bit more apt to try to handle more changes. So, if I'm doing a project where I don't know that much about it, it makes more sense to kind of use more of an adaptive approach. that breaks down into sometimes talking about an iterative or an incremental. There's a lot of blurriness between those two. So a lot of times we're starting to back off of whether we say, well, this is an iterative approach or this is an incremental, because kind of they start to blend a lot in there. But the hybrid takes all of these and kind of combines and determines on a project which approach makes more sense for a certain part of it. So if I look at the iterative, my word is chunk. When I do an iterative approach, it's because I break the work into smaller pieces. So for instance, if I'm going to put in a financial system, kind of falls into maybe accounts receivable, accounts payable, general ledger. Those are all iterations. Those are all chunks of work so that I can do that work and provide a result or an outcome to the actual stakeholders. And then I go to the next one. Now, if I chunk it, I'm doing somewhat the same type of work for each one of those chunks. When I do the incremental, I could say, well, basically, I'm also doing incremental because for the organization, I put in the accounts receivable. And then when I add to that the accounts payable, I've incremented the value. Most often, though, when we talk about incremental, it's more of a product, like your iPhone, where you have the iPhone 10, the iPhone 12, the iPhone 15's coming out now. Each time that product is incremented because there's additional functionality there. Regardless, what those are saying is, let's not try to go from beginning to end in one big chunk. Let's try and find pieces where we can, first of all, deliver benefits more often, but we can also, in effect, have that ability to adapt as changes need to be made, especially based on our competitor or new regulations that come out. Now, when we talk about this agile, there's really two main ways that we do this. And this is actually a diagram from Discipline Agile. When they talk about this iteration-based or time box based, where you bring items in, you prioritize them, you take a chunk of those, you work on them, you deliver those, you get approval for them, and then you go back and get the next chunk. And you're going back and forth within a time boxed area with a number of items that have been batched together, more in almost like a priority sequence. The other way of doing it is considered flow-based. Now, flow-based doesn't have time constraints on it. That iteration usually is, we do things in a 2 to 3 week cycle. Sometimes we can't get anything done of any value in only 2 to 3 weeks. So using this other flow-based approach, you take whatever needs to be done, you prioritize it, and then you work it until it's completed. You don't let it sit there and batch it up with other things and then work on a batch at a time. Flow-based, very common in things that you're doing like a help desk or a customer service, where you get a request in, you prioritize that request, and you end up moving it over until you finish that particular request. You don't sit there and batch it until I have 3 of those requests of the same type and work on all 3 at the same time. That's more that time box. So the framework, all of these different ways, they're a little different. Lean is that overall umbrella with some of the aspects that become mostly part of the mindset. Scrum is probably the most frequently used and understood, more of that time boxed approach, very specific as to the activities that are done within that 2 week or 3 week iteration or sprint, as they call it. The extreme programming, that's where that's been around for a long time. And there's still some things that we pull from there. The continuous integration aspect, the pair programming, things like that. The continual refactoring or technical cleanup that we do. Kanban is really the one that when we start talking about this continuous flow, comes from manufacturing, being able to take something and make sure it goes to completion. Some of the other ones, your test-driven development, those all come from more of a programming software development aspect, but they all kind of take pieces from each of these and put them together into when we start looking at hybrid. We take the best of each of these to put them together. Now, part of the problem is when we go from traditional methodologies where we have what steps we do and what deliverables we have to do, moving that into some of these kind of iffiness, especially Kanban, it's hard for an organization sometimes to move that quickly. And actually the presentation, I just did a presentation for the Honolulu chapter on this hybrid, and then they had a panel discussion afterwards, and they were all complaining about how it's taking so long to adopt that adaptive or kind of sprint iteration type of mode. And I'm going, well, maybe what we needed to do was, instead of trying to get everybody to do burn down charts and stand up meetings and things, why don't we take those mindsets instead and think about how we can just do what we're doing, but deliver it more often, empower the team, some of these other things, because there are certain parts of your project that still have to be done sequentially. That's waterfall, that's predictive. Even if I have a new software development effort, I'm going to put out a new app or whatever, maybe I do have to put some servers in, maybe I need some equipment. That still has to be done in a sequential aspect. I can't just randomly say, oh, well, you know what, I'd like to test it before I plug it in. It doesn't work. So we've got to be realistic as we go through, but this combination is what we're looking at. Mixing different people. We talk sometimes about I-shaped and T-shaped, and I'll mention that in a second. Different types of individuals that are working on the team, going into these shorter timeframes. That's probably the biggest thing. Can I take what I'm doing and chunk it into smaller pieces? When I'm doing this, I'm doing it by different sections, even of my presentation, looking at what I do in each one of those pieces. So there's a transition. I do something, and then we go to the next one. Stakeholder involvement. One of the things that Scrum, for instance, says is you have a single product owner. I have never worked on any project where I only have one stakeholder that knows everything as far as what I'm supposed to do. I always have multiple. Maybe it's a key stakeholder, but I have somebody that feeds information to that person and then maybe receives the result of what they're doing. I need all three of those stakeholders. And that's where we start to move back into saying it's not a single product owner. It is multiple stakeholders at different times. And from a project management, we need to understand when they need to be engaged and for what reason. When we start a little different with starting the project, and what's interesting is this has kind of moved in to all of our projects. Yes, creating a project vision was what we talk about in Agile, but should we not be doing that on all projects? Should we not understand what does this look like when we get finished? Is this going to be something big, small? Think about when you're building a building. Do we not come up and have somewhat of a vision of what it's going to look like? Even when we start, before we work into it, what's it going to be used for? What is the reason for doing this? Why is it different from something else? Why are we using different materials? Things like that. What are the key features and benefits? This is the beginning. Why are we doing it, and what's it going to kind of look like? So we have an idea of the direction we're going. In addition to that, then, as we make that journey from where we are in that vision until we deliver that solution, we need to have something that we can show progress. And so this concept of a roadmap, and it's kind of interesting if you go into the program management standard, the 4th edition, there is a roadmap. One of the main things that they talk about in a program is the program roadmap that shows the different areas and when those different components are going to be delivering different outcomes. That's a graphical method that we can show progress, made transparent of what's going on. It also allows us to make some changes. So when we start putting the roadmap together, we concentrate on what is going to be done first, and then maybe what's next as we go through, as far as the features, maybe we're going to deliver, etc. Even if I'm doing a building, I could still do a roadmap to show, okay, so I have the main structure completed. So now I move to the next step where I start doing the internal kind of different floors. And maybe some of those floors I don't build out because I'm not sure what we're going to use it for. Those type of things become part of your roadmap. So you have that ability to have some adaptability, even when you're doing something as predictive as building a building. Now, one of the areas where we start with different terminology, and this is where even with business analysis and project managers, we use some different words. So as a project manager, we collect requirements. As a business analyst, we elicit requirements. When we start talking about things as far as the product backlog itself, thank you. We talk about a backlog, meaning where we have all these things. A backlog could be your to-do list. This is things that we might do, but part of what we always have to do is prioritize those. Some of those things that we might do could be very, very large. Maybe it's a matter of what I might do is make a hotel reservation. That's a huge thing. It's going to have to be broken down into smaller pieces. And that's fine, but it's at least I know I need to be able to make a reservation. Maybe I need to pay for my stay. Maybe I need to charge things to my hotel room. Those are all different requirements, different levels. If they're very large, we refer to them as epics. Do I need to use that term with a stakeholder? No. This is where we have to be careful that we need to talk the language of the business people we're working with, not necessarily the language so that we can show off that, oh, I know what an epic is versus a feature versus a user story versus a task or activity. No, that's for ourselves. So we do use this concept of a user story. Now, to me, the big part of the user story is not just the fact that it's, can fit on a card and has the story on the front and the back, and it has all these different acronyms that it meets. But there's 3 parts to a user story. I, as some sort of individual or function or role. Secondly, want to do something. That's my real requirement. My benefit, why do I want to do this? That's the 3rd part of a user story. To me, the first part is where I get the value, different from what I did before. When I have the requirements and I have those written, we've done that forever. We've collected that, we've elicited it. What we do though is we add to that this idea of a persona. And just take the example I was using where I want to select and make a reservation on the hotel. If I make that reservation and I have stayed with that chain of hotels before, they know who I am and things are done a little differently. Now, I was lucky when I was able to come to KL back before the pandemic. I stayed at a hotel where I stay a lot, not to that specific property, but that brand of hotel. They knew me. They upgraded me because of who I was. That's the persona. Same thing if you select a seat on an airline, depends on who you are, whether you got to pay extra to get a little extra leg room or whatever. That's the persona. The persona tells me that even though I'm doing this requirement, I may have to do it differently. There may be different rules. There may be different information I need. That is where we add to. That's one of those agile things that I don't care if I don't exactly write it that way, but I do need to think about these different personas. Now, when we get into the team itself, one of the things I mentioned off of those principles had to do with that empowerment and inclusion of the team members in making those decisions. That's what we talk about when we talk about the idea of self-directing, self-organizing teams. Rather than the project manager laying out everything that has to be done and saying, you're going to do this task or activity and you're going to do this one, the team itself understands what needs to be done and they choose what they work on. Now, sometimes they have to work together because maybe one person has some idea of what needs to be done. Somebody else has another piece and they work together. That comes from that XP, when that extreme programming, when we had the pair programming, people working together. Kind of interesting when we talk about discipline agile. Discipline agile moves beyond what Scrum and some of the other ones talk about as far as team members. Scrum says you have a team, you have a Scrum master, and you have a product owner. Project manager, team member, product owner, they talk about additional stakeholders, which are there to help understand, and then maybe a specialist, depending on where you are. That specialist may be the business analyst who knows more about the domain and the business acumen of what we're doing. Maybe they're a technical person. Maybe they're an architect. Maybe they're a tester. So we bring back the idea that not everybody can do everything. And therefore, we may have to use some specialists for portions of the project. Now, the one role, though, that ends up becoming that product owner, key stakeholder, whatever, that role changes a little bit when we go into more of a hybrid or agile type of approach, because their role is not just providing us the requirements, but they're prioritizing those requirements based on the value that it's going to present to the business. So they're prioritizing, so we are more doing a value delivery approach. Understanding what needs to be done, how do we come up with the acceptance, inspecting what we've done and approving or accepting it as we go through. But the main thing is taking all these requirements and helping prioritize them so that they have more value to the business itself. Now, as I mentioned, the team members are a little different. If you go into the Agile Practice Guide, this is where this is really explained. And if you haven't had a chance to download, and especially as members of PMI, you've got over 50 documents that are free to you, whether they are standards or practice guides. The Agile Practice Guide came out along with the 6th edition, talked about I-shaped people and T-shaped people. I-shaped people are people that are very versed in one area. Your T-shaped people then start to stretch and have a little bit more knowledge and can support a few other things that are beyond what their basic competencies are. Very interesting as you start to look at that. I highly recommend that you go back and look at the Agile Practice Guide if you haven't. Now, I will tell you, though, it's slated in 2023 to be updated, so there'll be an updated version coming out in 24. I happen, because I'm working with a lot of the standards and practice guides, I'm seeing what the new schedule is for some of these updates that we're doing, but the Agile Practice Guide is meant to be updated. On the same hand, you may be aware that the 7th edition, yes, was very different. It lacked some of the structure that was in the 6th edition. So PMI has come out, and it just was released about a month ago, what they're calling their PGPG, Practice Group Practice Guide. That goes back and talks about some of the processes in a little bit more detail, but based on the process and as you're going through. Once again, as we do the Agile, we talk about planning. Planning, we do even more planning as we're coming from one horizon or one level down. We still have the strategic planning, which is kind of like your portfolio management. The visioning, where we start to put together our requirements. We have the milestone, some of the backlog that we start to gather. And then we start to chunk it into what are we going to deliver with the first release versus the second release. And we start to capture those specific requirements. We still may have some of the phase gates if we're doing a hybrid with some of the predictive, where we have certain points we stop and address what's going on. When we look more in a hybrid, it tends to be more continuously doing things, not so much doing a first piece, check it, go to the next piece, check it, but more often a little bit more of the types of reviews and things as we're doing that construction. Discipline Agile, and I really like this portion of Discipline Agile, the fact that they have milestones still, they still have reviews, but they are risk-based. So rather than checking to see if documentation has been done, they'll stop to see, is my architecture that I'm going to be using, is it going to work? Are we ready to put it into production? Those are kind of checkpoints we have, but they're not documentation oriented where you create a lot of documentation, have somebody review it, check it off, but you have the discussion, you make sure that we're ready to move to the next step. This is the structure that's shown in the PMBOK guide and the actual Agile practice guide from the standpoint of chunking things into a release. And this would have been your roadmap that would have shown what we're going to do in each release, breaking it down. And if I'm using that time boxed approach, I will take whatever I have to do for release 1 and I'll break it into smaller chunks. And then for each one of those 2 to 3 weeks, I'll determine exactly what I can do at that point in time. When we start talking about a few of these things, traditional scope, schedule, cost, there's some changes that really happen. This is probably the graphic I probably should have started with, because this is really the major change that happens. And that is, instead of taking all of those requirements that were given and determining how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost, we've kind of become realistic to the point we don't have forever to do anything. We have a time frame, regardless, even if it's just an expectation that I'm going to get that building ready and occupied by a certain date. And if that's the case, what I have to do is kind of identify what are those things that are the most important that have to be completed to meet that date. So our scope kind of gets prioritized and looked at as to what's the most important. Using a predictive approach, we still identify the requirements. We do the WBS, we look at the schedule to do those. Whereas in an adaptive, we're more looking at what needs to be done in certain chunks. And we do that planning and then figure out how long it's going to take, what it's going to do. What's different about scope, though, is this idea of this backlog grooming or backlog refinement. Rather than having everything decided up front, and then when a change comes in, you got to do change control. The product owner is continually incorporating the changes in so that when the team gets ready to work on it, changes just kind of are moved in when they need to be moved in. A very different concept, but allows us to be much more flexible. We talk about the schedule. We took the scope, we identified the different things that have to be done. We put together those schedules. I'm going through, I'm not reading all these slides. I know they're going to be posted, so you can go back and read them. When I do the adaptive, once again, we're taking small chunks of things and determining what we can do within the time frame that we're working with, rather than trying to schedule everything out. And the team itself is deciding what they can get done. A couple of things that really become part of this overall mindset, and that has to do with continuous improvement. We look at progress differently. If we're using traditional, most often we go back to our schedule, whereas in Agile, we're looking at progress on smaller chunks. How you display this, whether it's a burn down chart or your roadmap, kind of depends on what you're doing. But we still have some metrics. Scope metrics. What have we delivered? What do we still have to do? How long did it take us to do it? Some of our schedule metrics. How fast, the velocity is a term we use. We said we could do certain things. Were we able to accomplish it? The cycle time and lead time. From the time we start working on something, how long did it take us to finish it? Now, the lead time is from the time kind of a request comes in until we finish it. That, in my mind, doesn't mean anything because I let people give me requests at any point in time. Doesn't mean I'm going to get to them. Your quality metrics have to do with the testing. How much did we test? How long did it take us to fix things? Those type of metrics that we would have. So we can still have metrics, regardless the approach we're using. But when it comes down to it, your continuous improvement is threefold. You're continually looking at the process you're using and saying, does it make sense? Do I need to make some changes to it? You look at the product or the result or the solution, whatever you want to call it. Do we need to make some changes to it because it's not doing what we wanted it to do, or we need to make some adjustments to it? And then lastly, you have to continuously improve the ability of the team members to do the job. And how do we do that? We do that through retrospectives or lessons learned. Looking back on what we just did in a small time period and saying, what worked? Where do I need to make a few adjustments? And we make them now. This is the difference from what we do in traditional projects in the past. We waited till the end of the project to say, you know what, we should have done something. Well, how do I know if that would have worked or not? When you do it in more small chunks over a smaller period of time, if I should do something, I try it. And if it works, great, I incorporate. If it doesn't work, I try something else. But that's the retrospective lessons learned continuously throughout the project. One last thing, when we get to the end of the project, there's more to it than just saying, hey, you know, as a project manager, I hit this as far as the scope and the schedule and the budget. I'm going to throw the result over to the customer and hope they know how to use it. There's transition requirements that we have to have. We need to make sure that we put our information into the historical repository so future project managers can use it. But we also have to make sure that our recipients, our customers, our end users know how to use the product. Training, documentation, those type of things that we have to have as part of that transition plan and sustainability to make sure that when we give it to them, we make sure that it works. So when I talk about hybrid project management, it's about optimization. It's about optimizing how we do things, how we optimize the work towards producing a product that's effective and efficient. The idea is you have the freedom to change things, to make adjustments so that you're not always doing exactly the same thing. And as a BA, one of the things I hate to hear when I say, so what about this? Well, it's the way we've always done it. Well, maybe it's time to think about, is there a different way to do it? Not that I want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't want to completely undo everything we did because there's some value. But the value has to be determined when that value is there and when we need to make some changes. How much of the adaptive versus the predictive depends on your project. I think construction is still adaptive. It's mostly predictive, yes, because we built buildings before, but those final decisions on the individual floors, or if I'm building a house, the final decisions on the flooring and the lighting, that's adaptive. So I can have a blend of these things. So I've gone through this, and I know warp speed because there's so much here. I would encourage you, first of all, connect with me on LinkedIn. I tend to put articles or blogs out there periodically. I haven't done as much lately because kind of working on putting together you may be aware, especially for entry level project managers, the CAPM, or the Certified Associate Project Management certification, is changing in January. The exam is changing, the exam content outline. And so I've been really busy working with people preparing for that. I have a friend who's actually writing a book, and I'm actually creating a new course to do that. So that has to be updated by about February 1st. So I haven't had a chance to put out as much as I would like, but I encourage you to connect with me and kind of keep in touch. Questions, that's kind of how I got connected with some of you. Hopefully come March timeframe, I will be doing especially some business analysis classes for the KL chapter, and hopefully maybe we can connect at that point in time. But hopefully there's been some information here that kind of helps you kind of get started thinking about this. I would definitely take a look at a lot of those practice guides, especially the Agile practice guide, that you can do that as you go through. But with that, if there's any questions, I don't know if you've gotten some questions in the chat, or if somebody has a question. So I'll start looking at these real quick. Incremental approach, should we deliver something usable every increment? Usually when we talk about the increment, if I'm looking in, say, Scrum, those small iterations will deliver a piece of it. Usually what is delivered is at the release level. So think about the iPhone. Maybe you have the camera and then the facial recognition. Those are all individual components, which we would then release in a release or a new version of it. So usually we get pieces of it, and we usually call those outputs. When we get to the release level, then we have the full outcome that we release back to the customer.
I think there is a new question from Mr. Hotma Pasaribu.
Is it the same between the project vision and the project charter? Okay, first of all, project charter has really only two purposes: to authorize the start of the project and to authorize the project manager. If you actually go in and do all the rest on the project charter, it should include the vision. And that's where, to make that document more valuable, it does take what's on the business case, copy and paste it in to say, why are we doing the project? If you don't have that, you just kind of, yes, the project's starting, you're the project manager, and now we go into actually doing the scope. That's project charter is very misunderstood. Do I break the vision down to the roadmap? Yes. I take that vision of what those features and functions are supposed to be, and I will put them into some sort of sequence or time frame. Think about, for instance, when you're, well, my older daughter is in charge of the parent teacher association at school, and they have all these different events. So the vision is, yes, the overall involvement of the parents and the teachers and the students together. There are different events. Those events are put on the roadmap. And then as she gets closer to those events, like the one for the holiday coming up, now she's into all the detail. That's that rolling wave, progressive elaboration we talk about. That's really what the roadmap is. Okay. We got a lot of questions in here. Forming an agile team in the functional organization. Functional organizations are a little hard because, once again, the functional manager is in charge. But I have actually seen probably the most effective agile team was with Walmart.com, not the regular Walmart stores, but the online Walmart, which you most may be aware of over here. They are formed to support a portion of the product that they have. They stay together all the time. Actually, the work comes to them. Is it similar to a functional? Yes, but it's based on the product functionality, not based on a human resources or finance or purchasing, things like that. So, yeah. Hybrid is a transition, yes, because it will take some of the traditional and add some of the agile to it. It's a mindset. Delivering more often, having more empowered team members, things like that. The processes we do, the outputs we do, may be based on the culture of the organization and the methodology. I think, once again, going directly into Scrum for an organization usually doesn't apply to all the projects. Just give you an idea. I was working with some people from Boeing, people who build the airplanes, right? And the person in the class said, Boeing has decided they are doing all their projects in the future using Agile. And I said, I hope you're not trying to build an airplane using an Agile method. And we kind of know what happened with one of their airplanes. They didn't do it, and they didn't get everything done that needed to be done, and they had a lot of problems with it. So it doesn't work for everything. Things that have to be done sequentially still have to be done sequentially. You can't just prioritize that, oh, this is more important. Take an airplane. What's more important, the engine or the wing or the pilot or the fuel? They're all important. They all have to be done, but they have to be done in a sequential manner. You don't just get the fuel and then, oh, by the way, I need a fuselage to put it into. No, kind of there. Let me see. The transition phase, this is something I talk about more in the business analysis. It is identified in the program standard and also more in the BA practice guide, because that is where we have to look at from a customer standpoint, and especially if this project is doing a lot of changes, especially to the way people are going to do things in the future. We need to make sure of that readiness, that the customer, the end user, is ready to use what we've created. And that's that transition, the training, the documentation, all of those type of things that have to be put in place. Do we use a metric? Yeah, I mean, obviously we need to see, but sometimes, unfortunately, we also have a date we have to do something by. So we just have to try and see if we can get as many people ready as possible. I mean, think about it. You train somebody on a new project and a new application, whatever. If somebody gets hired 2 weeks afterwards, how are they going to get trained? So when I do the training, I need to keep in mind that There may be people that aren't here yet or weren't able to attend the training who still need to go through it. So not only do I need to put the training together, but I need to make sure it's available after I finish the project. Because transition kind of is in that mode where it's the end of the project and the beginning of the users using it. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions?
Okay, Greta, that's very insightful. Thank you for addressing these presentations. There is a lot of things that we can grasp from your presentations. I think we also have another follow-up question from Mr. Sahani. So follow up the previous questions. What makes a big difference from waterfall, single delivery, and increment approach if each increment only parts of work are not visible?
So if I go back, even let's talk about building a building. I could still do increments to it from the standpoint that, yeah, the building is built, but the way that I open up certain floors. Now, I realize there are some regulations that say everything's got to be ready before I can occupy it. But for instance, how much that means. I worked on with a group that they were putting a new hospital in. And the 5th floor was supposed to be where the radiology was supposed to be. So they built out some of it, but because they hadn't really decided finally what kind of equipment was going to be needed, they couldn't finish out some of the wiring and the protection and thing because of the radiology. So even though they had the rest of the building occupied, that particular floor wasn't. So delivering things in increments still can be done. And I think, once again, having that flexibility rather than saying every single thing has to be completely finished before anybody can use anything, once again, changes. Now, there may be some regulations, and I know in certain countries, there are very strict regulations as to how much can be finished or how much has to be finished before you move in. But that's probably the far extreme of delivering pieces of it.
Okay, that's great. Okay. So maybe I have other question.
Okay.
There is a topic that interests me. You mentioned a lot of things in here, such as agile planning cycles, and also in here you also mentioned about a team member generalizing specialists. So maybe the point that I want to ask to you, that I want to highlight, is what the things or key factors that we have to consider in order to combine several approach in hybrid management, whether this approach is best suited for the team and or the organization or not. So maybe you can give us like the highlight of the point.
Well, I think the organization has to, I mean, sometimes our biggest challenge is when we get in that point is the organization. They're used to seeing a traditional, assignment of team members to work to be done. And certain team members also are not, they don't feel comfortable just waiting to see what needs to be done. They kind of want to be told that theory X, theory Y, when we go back, that we have to look at different people and where they feel comfortable. So we do have to do some of that. But it's the motivation, it's getting people to feel comfortable to do things. Now, working in a group environment, once again, there are certain people that just don't fit in that environment. That's something we have to recognize, because there's an assumption here that we're all going to be working together. The result is the team effort, not individual. So it's the performance of what the team is doing, not necessarily each individual. And that sometimes it's both the organization's perceptions that have to change, but also we have to be aware people are different. And some people work together in groups much better than others. I think that is changing over time, because most of our entry-level people into the business have participated as children on sports teams. They're used to being in a team environment, whereas maybe some of our older generation never were able to be part of a team. So they're not used to that. They're used to doing things all individually. So does that kind of address what you were asking?
Yeah, that's very insightful. So I think we have to wear our organization first, and then we have also wear the team members. And there is a gap between the entry level, also the elder generation, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
Okay, it's good. It's good.
We-
I think we have, yeah.
I was going to say, I was looking at this last one that had to do with the ratio of these. You do at the beginning, when you start the project, at least understand how much change might occur on the project. And if you've got either regulations that are changing in the background, or you have things you've never done before, you probably want to kind of move towards somewhat of at least chunking things into smaller pieces so that you can address those and allow that change to happen. And when it happens, then we can work with it. We can at least start there. The difference I see between using, say, the time-boxed approach that is more Scrum and the flow-based, which is more the Kanban approach, when we get into that, a lot depends on what we're actually trying to do. Can we get anything accomplished in those small timeframes? But that's also something that can change. We would not want to change from a time box to a continuous flow within a release. But at the end of a release, we may want to stop and say, maybe we do things a little differently. So once again, making kind of, at least in the beginning, how much of the change are we going to run into? And if we're going to run into a lot of change, we probably want to do a little bit more of the adaptive type rather than trying to plan the entire project up front, which is the predictive.
Thank you for the meaningful additions. That's a lot of things that you can grab. And I think we have also another question from Mr. Hafid Wibi Ramadan. So the question is, it is about optimize the predictive or adaptive agile ratio to suit the needs of the project needs. I assume that in the beginning we decide some ratio, and going forward it could be adjusted or justified. Are those optimization happen throughout life cycle?
Yeah, that's when I was talking about the fact of the continuous improvement of the process. Because if we're doing something that's not working the way we're doing it, then let's figure out how to change it, and that's where we optimize by looking at, in these retrospectives or lessons learned, we look at all three of those things, but especially, are we doing things that aren't working? Are we wasting time? And then what kind of changes do we need to make to the product? Because maybe our testing isn't done, but the process has to do with, maybe we're biting off too much. Maybe we're going too high of a velocity, which is really that metric as to how much we think we can accomplish in a period of time. And maybe we need to back down, because if we choose a high velocity, but we're not delivering on it, maybe we're trying to do too much. So yeah, it's continually, which is why we do the continuous retrospectives and lessons learned. Looking back on what we did to see, can we do it better? Can we do things a little differently? But yeah, throughout the project, not waiting until the end.
Okay, I hope that will answer the question of Mr. Hasbi Wibi Ramadan. And is there any question for the attendees? Please just send it to the chat box. Feel free, and if you have any questions, also want to speak up with also want to have a conversation with our speakers directly, just let me know, and we'll give you the access.
Right. And please go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn. If you have questions, send me a question through LinkedIn, and I'll be more than happy to have a conversation with you. And I can point you to especially some of the different PMI practice guides that can really help. That, you know, I would say as a member of PMI, download most of those practice guides, the managing change, the one on organizational performance, the business analysis practice guide, the risk management. That one isn't a practice guide anymore. It's a standard, but it's very readable, very good. Program standard. These, they're easy to read. They're things that you can look at and understand, and really good. Remember that all of those have been written and reviewed by people from all over the world as far as PMI. I really strongly participate in most of these. You'll see my name as either a contributor or a reviewer or a SME on most of them, because I take the time to work with and work on these practice guides, because I think they're so critical, as they go way beyond just what's in the PMBOK guide.
Okay, thank you, Greta. It's nice. Standish, please, if you have any questions, we have still student checks in here, so don't hesitate to send questions. Greta, so maybe I want to continue our discussion about the factors that we have to consider in order to form the best approach in hybrid project management. I also took it from you that the way that I understand from your perspective that project management in a hybrid is very depending on analysis, because we have to consider the things that may occur in the futures. So maybe from your perspective of your experience, how important we have to analyze to chunk the projects into smaller chunks in order to get the project success.
Yeah, I think unless it's something that we have done over and over again and we know what needs to be done, in order for us to kind of look at something, and most of our projects today, besides construction or engineering, those type, are more kind of adapting and making a change to what we're doing today. Those type of change management type of projects. And in those cases, we really need to go back and kind of use some of the business analyst skills of looking at currently how it's done, what we are looking at, what needs to be done in the future, that vision, and what is that gap. Now, if that gap is really big, it makes more sense to try to kind of do small steps to get from where we are doing today to where we need to go. If you look at enterprise architecture, there's a vision of what they expect in different aspects of the enterprise, but people are realistic to say we can't go from point A to point B immediately. Now, except I'll have to say we have kind of changed our way of thinking after COVID, because in the past we said, okay, so we want to change the way people do something, like maybe going from purely working together co-located to virtual. We could do it in small steps where we could have certain times that you're virtual and certain times you're still together. We didn't have that choice. One day we got told we're all going to be virtual. And you know what? Even though people didn't like it, we had to do it. We have learned that we can change immediately, not because we want to and not because we feel comfortable, but because we had to. Now, as we start making these changes and go back to that transition, I probably don't want to do that to customers, to say, oh, by the way, today, and actually I'm working with one company right now where they manually work through with orders. They take an order and somebody works on a piece of it, and then they send it to the next person and somebody else does it. The company is trying to make it so that it's totally automated. First of all, there's a lot of resistance because people that were working on it are going, so what's going to happen to my job? And of course, because of that, maybe they're not quite as open to telling what the computer should do that they do, their thought process. So some of this we have to get around because obviously we've got to optimize what's happening. And I think that's once again one of these areas that if I do it in chunks, it's easier to rather, in some cases, I could do a portion of it at a time. And that's kind of what I'm working with them is trying to figure out, okay, so here's the vision we want to be where it's totally automated from the time that order comes in, that the computer processes every step of it. We're not there yet. And so chunking it to say, okay, so maybe we just make sure that when the order comes in, it's got all the information it needs to have in it. Can that be done by the computer rather than a person? Yes. But then the next decision as to where to go may need some sort of human intelligence in it. So, but yeah, it's a big change. But we do need to have, we need to analyze what's going on. And that's why I think the LinkedIn learning that I did on business analysis for project managers is really critical that we look at, because that starts to say, if you don't have a business analyst who does all this analysis and competencies that they learn as a BA, what do you as a project manager need to do then? Where do you need to concentrate on understanding a little better of what needs to be done on the project? So kind of an interesting transition to build up some of those competencies.
Yeah, thank you, Greta. That's a lot of excitement. I think there is one last question.
Oh, yeah,
so this is from Mr. Hotma Pasaribu. Maybe you would like to read it, or
yeah, emphasize the difference between stewardship, which is in the PMBOK 7, and servant leadership in Agile. Stewardship more means taking responsibility and accountability for certain things. It's more of a general concept. The servant leadership is more kind of the way, as a project manager, we change from being that command and control where we tell people what to do and when, and get some more input from the team itself. So that servant leadership, kind of the project manager supports the team, gives the team more authority, more responsibility, more accountability, that's self-organizing. So, and part of that came the fact that PMI even was discussing changing the term from project manager to project leader really came because Scrum came out and said, we don't need a project manager. We have a Scrum master. We don't need a project manager to tell the team what to do. Well, no, but you still need somebody to do something more than just facilitate a stand-up meeting and make sure people are in attendance, whatever. To me, that Scrum Master role is okay, but I think there's more to it. We still need a project manager to report. I don't see how a CFO, financial person, is going to really come into the room and read the information, radiator information. They're still going to want reports. A project manager still needs to provide that communication that's needed to different stakeholders. But yeah, the command and control, but this goes back. Remember, I made the comment theory X, theory Y. You need to, if you're not familiar with that, theory X basically says if you have an individual that's a theory X person, they need to kind of be told what to do. They're used to being told what to do. On the other hand, a theory Y person, you tell them what needs to be done and then let them decide how to do it. You have to understand which type of person you're working with. You still need to use somewhat the command and control at a very soft level with those theory X people. But other people, and especially those that work best on some sort of a self-organizing agile team, these are the things that we need to do. We as a group need to figure out how to get it done. Not having a project manager say, okay, so you're going to work on task A and you're going to work on B, etc. And letting the team make some of those decisions. It takes a change and it takes different types of people. So sometimes we have to kind of do an in-between. And what I'm seeing is that sometimes, because having everybody just select things, they don't all things, not everything gets selected, or you have somebody that selects too much and somebody else that doesn't select anything. And so I'm seeing kind of a hybrid in there where we have that planning session and people select, but then we go back and look at and say, oh, by the way, Greta, you really can't do all of that. So decide which of those pieces you really want to do, and let's let somebody else pick up the rest of it, so that there's a little bit of oversight into that whole assignment, self-assignment that's going on. So even then, kind of going from telling people what to do to letting people completely decide, maybe there's a middle ground. And that to me is the hybrid.
Okay, thank you, Greta. I hope that will answer for Mr. Hotma Pasaribu questions. So once again, thank you very much, Greta, for addressing these insightful and very delightful sessions. But before we go, there is announcements. So for the attendees, the e-certificate and the videos will be added to your credential and will be sent to your emails within a week. And before we let Greta go, so we would like you to switch on your camera and let's take a group photo on the Zoom so that we can keep it as a memento. So Mas Rais, please.
Okay, I will take some picture.
Hi, Greta. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for asking me. I appreciate it. I hope to see some of you in person in the next, maybe within the next few months. So
yeah, it will be nice.
Great.
And there is also a big thank you from me because you're addressing the session in very early. It's 4 a.m. in San Diego, right?
Actually, it's 5:30 now. So
5:30 now.
yeah, it's 5:30 now. It's time to get up. But I have to start teaching in 2 more hours. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, 2 more page.
Mr. Denny Irawan, thank you, Greta. Good presentation.
Okay, done.
Okay. Thank you for the questions. And please, if you want to connect with Greta, encourage you to continue your discussion with Greta. Don't hesitate. Just add your connection in LinkedIn. And thank you. Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Hi, Greta.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greta. I hope we can see in person. Okay.
Thank you, Greta.
I think your
Yeah.
microphone is on mute.
I know I turned it off. Yeah, I'll keep in touch with you and see if we can make sure we can arrange something. So
Yeah, it's
Sounds
lovely. Yeah,
good.
sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah,
I will see you all later. Bye.
yeah, see you
See
later.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Saya end ya sessionnya ya.
Oke, Mas.
Terima kasih semua.
Terima kasih.